You have not become aggressive, you have become self-contained, and to systems that relied on your emotional availability, that containment feels like a threat. What they call dangerous is simply a psyche no longer open for use. This is a symbolic interpretation of the unconscious. You are not in crisis, you are not shutting down, you are not dissociating because you cannot cope. What has happened in you is far more precise and far more final. The old access points to your psyche have closed, not because you chose to close them, not because you are performing strength, not because you are punishing anyone. They close the way a wound seals after the foreign object is removed. The organism does not ask permission. It completes the movement and then it becomes structure. You notice it in small, almost humiliating ways. A question is asked one you once would have answered too generously, and nothing in you rises to meet it. Someone provokes you with a familiar tone, hoping for the familiar reaction, and the expected emotional electricity does not appear. You do not hold back. There is simply no charge to release. You do not explain yourself, not in pride, not in anger. In fact, your silence is not even the silence of restraint. It is the silence of a door that no longer opens because the hinge has been rebuilt. From the outside, this looks like withdrawal. To those who relied on your permeability, it looks like cruelty. To those who fed on your responsiveness, it looks like betrayal. They will call it coldness, ego, arrogance, trauma, bitterness, anything that turns your completed inner shift into a temporary mood they can wait out. But you know, even if you cannot yet name it, that you have crossed into a different psychic geometry. And this is why a healed empath feels dangerous to everyone, because healing does not make you kinder in the way others imagine. It makes you less available to unconscious possession. It ends the old transaction by which your sensitivity was used as an entrance. I will speak to you as I would in a small room, in a seminar where I look at one person and speak as if the whole matter of the psyche is concentrated into a single fate. Because for you it is, and I will not soothe you with modern language. I will not tell you what to do. I am telling you what has already been done in you, what has already happened, and why the world around you is reacting as if a silent power has moved. The first fact is simple. Your former self was organized around a role, not necessarily a conscious one, but a role all the same, the one who understands, the one who softens, the one who absorbs, the one who explains, the one who keeps the atmosphere livable. The empathic person is often drafted into this role early, long before adulthood. It is not moral virtue, it is adaptation. In a home where emotions were volatile, you learned to read the room. In a system where love was conditional, you learned to anticipate. In a family where anger was dangerous, you learned to metabolize it silently and become good. In such a system, the empath becomes a living instrument of regulation. You did not merely feel others, you carried them. Now you do not. This is the whole scandal. And because it is a scandal to the unconscious, others cannot speak of it directly. They will say, you changed. They will say you are distant. They will say you are not yourself. They will say you are acting weird, acting cold, acting superior. Notice the word acting. They treat your new structure as performance, because to admit it is structure would mean admitting something terrifying, that the old arrangement depended on your unconscious compliance, and that compliance is gone. This is why old power collapses. Most relational power is not created through overt domination. It is created through invisible asymmetries. Who explains, who apologizes, who initiates repair, who holds emotional complexity, who tolerates ambiguity, who has to be the mature one. These asymmetries are often sanctified as personality traits. Your sensitivity was praised as virtue precisely because it served the system. But when you integrate what was repressed, especially anger, the virtue stops being a supply line. The empath no longer provides the emotional infrastructure that other people use to live above their own depths. You must understand what dangerous means here. Not violent, not cruel, dangerous in the psychological sense, unpredictable to old complexes, impermeable to old projections, unhookable by the old bait. The healed empath becomes dangerous because they no longer cooperate with the unconscious games of others, and they no longer cooperate with their own persona. Persona is not a mask you choose. It is the mask you are rewarded for. It is the face that gets you safety. And you have been rewarded for being accessible, for being easy to talk to, for being understanding, for being so calm, for being so empathetic. These compliments are not innocent. They are a form of training. They condition you to remain open. They condition you to remain legible. They condition you to remain a doorway. But individuation is the process by which the psyche refuses to be reduced to its function in the collective. It is the slow, sometimes brutal emancipation of the self from the roles that kept the ego acceptable. This is why individuation often looks to others like selfishness. The collective calls anything selfish that no longer serves it. You have reached a point in individuation where the inner center is no longer negotiated. In earlier stages, you were still persuadable. You could still be guilted, pulled, shamed, emotionally recruited, even when you set boundaries. Those boundaries were decisions, fragile decisions that required energy, repeated justification, a constant maintenance. You had to choose them again and again. And because you had to choose them, others could pressure you to unchoose them. But now you are describing something different, not a decision, a completed shift. This is the crucial point when anger is integrated. Boundaries cease to be moral statements and become architecture. Anger is the great repressed force in the empath, not because the empath lacks anger, but because anger threatened attachment, anger threatened belonging, anger threatened the fragile peace of the family. So it was pushed down, spiritualized, reinterpreted as sadness, converted into caretaking, displaced into anxiety, turned into headaches, turned into stomach pain, turned into overthinking, turned into tears. Repression does not annihilate energy, it relocates it into the unconscious, where it becomes fate. And when you integrate anger, you do not become angrier, you become less negotiable. The moment anger is truly integrated, you stop pleading for permission to exist, not because you decide to stop, But because the psyche stops producing the old reflex, the reflex to appease, the reflex to explain, the reflex to soften your truth until it is harmless, the reflex to scan faces, adjust tone, offer disclaimers, this reflex was not politeness. It was a survival mechanism built around repression. Once the repressed energy is made conscious and integrated, the mechanism no longer needs to run. It ends. Others feel this ending as danger because they can no longer reach the levers that used to move you. Let me make it concrete in Jungian terms, but I will use the concepts only to illuminate what has already happened, not to turn your life into a checklist. Repression created a shadow. The shadow is not merely bad traits. It is all life that the ego could not own without losing love. In your case, the shadow contained anger, refusal, selfishness, sexual vitality perhaps, even a certain cold intelligence. Whatever was punished, whatever was not mirrored, whatever was not allowed. And because the empath tends to identify with goodness, the shadow becomes especially potent. The more you identify with being kind, the more your anger becomes demonic in the unconscious. It does not disappear. It becomes autonomous. Projection is the mechanism by which people externalize their own shadow. They see in you what they cannot bear in themselves, and they attempt to manage it. When you were highly accessible, your persona made it easy for others to project onto you. They could imagine you as endlessly understanding, endlessly forgiving, endlessly available. They could deposit their chaos into your nervous system and call it connection. They could offload guilt, confusion, grief, and then feel cleansed. This is not conscious cruelty, it is unconscious economy, but it is still theft. Now projection fails, or rather, it rebounds, because you no longer mirror the image they need. Your eyes do not reflect their story back to them. Your face no longer offers that old reassurance. You are okay, even if you are not. Your silence no longer provides the soothing illusion that their behavior is understandable, and so the projector panics. They experience your neutrality as accusation. They experience your calm as judgment. They experience your boundary as aggression. This is one of the deepest laws of projection. When the container refuses the projection, the projector feels attacked. Here is where complexes enter. A complex is a splintered knot of emotion and memory around which the psyche organizes repeating patterns. Complexes do not respond to logic. They respond to cues. If someone has a mother complex, they will seek unconsciously to recreate the mother-child dynamic, either to repair it, to reverse it, or to remain trapped in it. Many people live their entire relational life inside complexes, rarely meeting another person directly. They meet the archetype, they meet the imprint. You were, for many, a perfect screen for complexes, the rescuer, the mother, the confessor, the forgiving saint, the one who returns, the one who stays, the one who can be emotionally used without consequence. When you stop being emotionally accessible, the complex loses its stage, and when a complex loses its stage, the person feels as if reality is collapsing. This collapse produces precisely the reactions you described: unease, panic, distancing, sometimes sudden hostility. It is not that you have harmed them, it is that you have deprived their unconscious pattern of oxygen. What you are watching is not morality, it is mechanism. Let us consider the symbol of the mirror, because it appears inevitably in such psychological movements. A mirror is the object that reflects without intention. It shows what is there. For a long time you were a living mirror, but not in the noble sense. You reflected back to others what they wanted to see. You reflected their goodness, their pain, their excuse, their innocence. You polished their self-image by understanding them. You made it easier for them to remain unconscious by offering empathy without consequence. But now your mirror has changed. It is no longer polished for them. It reflects more coldly, it reflects more accurately, and when a mirror becomes accurate, those who depended on distortion feel threatened. The healed empath becomes dangerous because they become an honest mirror without negotiation. This honesty does not need to be spoken. It is structural. It is in the nervous system. It is in the way you do not rush to reassure. It is in the way you do not flinch at other people's discomfort. It is in the way you do not offer yourself as emotional currency to buy peace. It is in the way your presence makes deception harder. Now I will give you the first dream, and I will interpret it as I would in analysis, not as entertainment, but as a symbolic map of what you are living. You dream you are in a long corridor of a house you recognize as your childhood home. Yet the architecture is wrong. The corridor is too long, the ceilings too high. There are doors on both sides, many more than should exist. The lights flicker, but you are not afraid of darkness. You are afraid of being seen. You walk quietly, as if trying not to disturb something. You come to a door that you know belongs to you, and you reach for the handle. It is locked. You check your pocket and find a small key. But when you insert it, it turns only halfway and stops. Behind you, footsteps, not loud, but persistent. Someone is following. You do not turn. You press your hand against the door and feel heat on the other side, as if a fire is burning inside the room that used to be yours. You wake with your heart steady, not racing, but heavy. This dream is not about fear of intimacy. It is about the end of access. The corridor is the old psychic passageway, your familiar way of moving through relational space quietly, accommodatingly, as if your presence must not disturb. The doors represent compartments of the psyche, rooms of memory, rooms of feeling, rooms of roles. The fact that there are too many doors means the psyche has been over-compartmentalized, which often happens when a child has to manage too many emotional states, both their own and those of others. The flickering lights are consciousness itself, intermittent awareness, the way you have seen and not seen, known and not known, because full seeing would have demanded a break from the system. The locked door that belongs to you is the crucial symbol. This is the private self, your inner room now protected. But you interpret locked as loss, because your persona was trained to equate openness with safety. Yet the heat behind the door tells the real story. That heat is the integrated fire of anger. It is not destructive in the dream. It is contained. It is in your room. It is yours. The key that turns halfway and stops indicates that the old method of access, the old key, the old permission-based opening no longer works. Something in you refuses entry even to you in the old way. Your psyche is reorganizing. The footsteps behind you are the collective, the complex, the old relational pursuer people, roles, expectations still following the old corridor, expecting you to open, expecting the familiar availability, but you do not turn. Notice that you do not confront, you do not negotiate, you simply do not turn. This is the dangerous calm you describe. The ego is no longer dramatizing the conflict. The self has already decided. This dream is not an invitation to open the door again. It is confirmation that the fire is now contained inside your own structure. This is what others sense. They sense the heat. They sense that there is something in you that used to leak outward as accommodation, and now it is behind a locked door. That containment feels dangerous to those who were warmed by your leakage, or who used your leakage as proof that they could still reach you. Now let us move to the labyrinth, because every individuation process eventually produces it. The labyrinth is the symbol of a psyche that cannot be solved by linear morality. It is the structure of complexity itself, and it is the opposite of the empath's old fantasy that if you are good enough, clear enough, understanding enough, everything will become simple and safe. That fantasy is a child's bargain with chaos. You have left the bargain. When you enter the labyrinth, you stop living by the hope that explanation produces love. You discover that the center of the labyrinth is not understanding. It is a form of presence that does not need agreement. And once you discover this, you cannot return to the corridor. This is why your relationships destabilize. They were built on the corridor, not the labyrinth. They were built on linear exchanges. You offer openness. They offer tolerable closeness. You offer understanding. They offer belonging. You offer emotional labor. They offer temporary peace. Such relationships are not always consciously exploitative. They may have even felt loving, but their structure depended on your permeability. Now permeability ends, access ends, and what ends access is not cruelty, it is integration. When you integrate shadow, you stop being a surface. This sentence alone is enough to explain the panic of others. People who live primarily in persona require others to remain surfaces. They require predictable masks, stable roles, familiar reactions. They require you to be readable because their own anxiety is managed through social scripts. The healed empath interrupts scripts without announcing it. Your refusal to play your old part is not a dramatic rebellion. It is a quiet failure to respond. It leaves others without choreography, and without choreography, the unconscious appears. That is why you become dangerous, not because you attack, because your presence makes the unconscious visible. The next symbol is the locked door, but not as a simple boundary. The locked door is not a wall, it is a threshold with a condition. The condition used to be, if you ask nicely, if you need me, if you make me feel guilty, if you cry, if you accuse, if you flatter, if you threaten abandonment, then I open. These were the old keys. People collected them. Some did it innocently, some did it expertly, but either way, the door opened. Now the lock has been changed, and this is the end of old power. Power, in many relationships, is the ability to reliably provoke a response. If I can make you explain, I have power. If I can make you defend, I have power. If I can make you reassure me, I have power. If I can make you apologize, I have power. If I can make you soften, I have power. If I can make you angry in the old way, reactive, guilt-ridden, desperate to repair, I have power. But if you no longer respond, then the old power is gone. This is why people escalate. They increase pressure because pressure used to work. They repeat old lines. They accuse you of being cold. They threaten. They withdraw to punish you. They become confused. They become offended. All of this is an attempt to find the key that still fits. When none works, they panic, not always outwardly. Sometimes the panic appears as sudden distance, polite disappearance, a fading of contact, a subtle freezing, but the mechanism is the same. Their complex cannot locate itself in relation to you. They cannot find the familiar dominance, the familiar superiority, the familiar emotional leverage, and when a complex loses orientation, it experiences annihilation. You might be tempted to interpret this as your fault, because your old persona was trained to assume responsibility for the emotional field. But that assumption was itself part of the pathology of the system. And I use the word pathology carefully, not to label you, to label the relational pattern in which one person becomes the container for what others refuse to contain. Now, because I am speaking in Jungian terms, I must speak of the self. The self is not the ego. It is not your conscious identity. It is the regulating center of the whole psyche, the totality that seeks wholeness. Individuation is the ego's gradual alignment with the self, which often means the ego must surrender its addictive attachment to approval. What you are living now is not self-confidence. It is ego decentering. The ego is no longer the negotiator of your value. It is no longer running out to bargain with the world every time discomfort arises. Instead, the ego is being held by something deeper. This is why your calm feels different. It is not composure. It is containment by the self. And the self, when it begins to dominate, is experienced by others as a kind of cold gravity. It does not beg. It does not chase. It does not collapse. It does not perform. It simply is. This is profoundly threatening to those who lived by emotional economies. Now let us address a particularly misunderstood point. Many will interpret your new structure as defense. They will say, you built walls because you got hurt. They will say, you are afraid of intimacy. They will say, you are avoiding vulnerability. This language is alluring because it offers a moral explanation that returns power to the collective. If you are defending, then you are still reacting. If you are reacting, then you can be persuaded, fixed, softened, rehabilitated into accessibility. But what if you are not defending? What if you have simply finished a developmental cycle? In the psyche, Certain movements are irreversible. A child cannot return to the womb. A consciousness cannot unsee what it has seen. A person cannot integrate a shadow function and then credibly pretend it is not theirs. You can suppress it again. Yes, but suppression is not innocence. It is a lie told to the self, and the self punishes lies with symptoms. Your shift is not defense if it is accompanied by a strange clarity rather than fear. You said it, you are not reacting, you are not explaining. The absence of reaction is not numbness, it is completion. This completion often arrives with a particular sensation you feel dangerous to others, but inside you feel clean, not happy, not bright, clean, as if something sticky has been removed from your skin, as if you can finally sense where you end. That sensation is the return of psychic boundaries at the level of structure. This is why emotional access ends. Emotional access is not intimacy. Emotional access is the ability of another person to enter your inner field and rearrange it. Many people confuse this with love. They believe love means you are affected by me. You move when I move. Your mood is responsive to my mood. Your nervous system is available to regulate mine. Under this misunderstanding, your old empathy looked like love because it was access. Now access ends, and they call it lovelessness. But the psyche does not measure love by access. The psyche measures love by truth. And truth often looks like separation before it looks like connection. I will now give you a second dream, because the unconscious will always provide symbolic commentary on such shifts. This dream is shorter, sharper. You dream you are standing in front of a mirror in a dim room. Your face is calm. Behind you, in the mirror, you see a figure, someone you know, or perhaps not someone specific, but a presence standing close, almost touching you. In waking life, this would make you tense, but in the dream, you do not move. The figure begins to speak, but you cannot hear words. You only see their mouth moving. Then you notice something unsettling. The mirror does not reflect the figure's face clearly. Their features blur, as if the mirror refuses to render them. The figure becomes irritated. They tap the mirror. They wipe it, as if the mirror is dirty. But the mirror remains clear for you and opaque for them. The figure's frustration grows. They push harder, as if to break through. You watch, still, calm. Then you notice a thin crack appears not in the mirror, but in the air between you and the mirror, like an invisible glass pane. The figure hits that pane and recoils. You wake. This dream is a perfect portrait of what is happening around you. The mirror reflects you clearly, indicating increased self-perception, an ego less distorted by others' projections. The figure behind you is the other person's complex attempting to enter your psychic field from behind unconscious. Intimate, invasive, habitual. Their speech without sound is significant manipulation, guilt, demand, expectation, communication that is not actually dialogue but an attempt to evoke reflex. In the dream you cannot hear because the old hypnotic spell of their words is gone. You see the mechanism, but it does not enter. The mirror refusing to render their face is the failure of projection. Their identity, as they know it, depended on your mirror. They were legible to themselves through your emotional response. When you stop reflecting, their image blurs, they panic, they interpret this as your fault. They attempt to clean the mirror, meaning they try to restore the old dynamic. Be understanding again, be kind again, be open again. But the mirror is not dirty, it is accurate. It simply no longer participates. The most decisive symbol is the invisible pain that cracks in the air. That pain is your new boundary, not a wall you built consciously, but an energetic structure that exists before thought. It appears as invisible because boundaries at this level are not speeches, they are not explanations. They are felt, others run into them and cannot explain why. They only know I can't reach you, and because they cannot tolerate that, they escalate until they hurt themselves on your structure. They then accuse you of having hurt them. This is how power collapses. It collapses against something it cannot name. Now, let us go deeper, because if we remain at the level of relational mechanics, we miss the real point. Why your healing, your individuation, creates not only discomfort in others, but a transformation in the entire field around you. The empath, before integration, often functions as a repository for collective shadow. You receive what others cannot hold. You are the one who can listen without flinching. You are the one who can forgive quickly. You are the one who can absorb ambiguity. This can be beautiful, but it becomes pathological when it replaces the other person's development. The empath becomes a sink. The other person does not individuate, they discharge. When you integrate your own shadow, you stop being a sink, you cease to be the collective solution to its own unconsciousness. This is why, in families and groups, a single individuating person can create enormous turbulence, not because they preach, not because they attack, because the system loses its dumping ground, and systems, like psyches, resist losing their dumping grounds. A family system often depends on one person being the feeler, one person being the peacekeeper, one person being the responsible one person being the scapegoat. These roles are not chosen, they are assigned by necessity. When you stop playing your role, the entire system must reorganize, but most systems would rather punish the individuating person than reorganize, because reorganization requires everyone to meet their own shadow. So the system responds with moralism. It says you are selfish. It says you are cold. It says you are arrogant. It says you have been influenced. It says you have changed for the worse. Moralism is always the last weapon of the collective when it cannot regain control through softer means. But you are not dealing with morality. You are dealing with psychic economy. The old economy was your sensitivity buys belonging. The new economy is belonging that requires your sensitivity, as currency is no longer acceptable to the self. This is why you cannot go back, not because you are stubborn, because your psyche will not pay that price again. This is the moment when many empaths try to compromise. They try to remain kind while remaining inaccessible. They try to remain loving while refusing exploitation. They try to be gentle while not being available. This is a noble attempt, but it often fails because it still presumes you can negotiate structure. At your stage, structure has already set. This is where I must insist on the integration point you demanded. Boundaries have become structure, not decision, not strategy. You are not learning to set boundaries. Your psyche is now built with them, and this is why your danger is experienced as calm. Calm is not the absence of intensity. Calm is intensity that is contained. A snake coiled is calm. Fire in a hearth is calm. The sea at night is calm, yet it contains depth that could swallow a ship. Calm is not softness. Calm is power without display. You have become calm in this sense. Now let us speak of the archetypal dimension without turning it into mythology for its own sake. In Jungian psychology, archetypes are patterns of psychic energy that shape perception and behavior. When you were the empathic good one, you carried an archetype: the caregiver, the healer, sometimes the martyr. These archetypes are not lies. They are real patterns, but when they become one-sided, they become possession. You become possessed by the image of yourself as the one who must heal, must understand, must sacrifice, must be morally superior through patience. What happens when this possession breaks? The opposite archetype emerges. Often it is the warrior, sometimes it is the queen, sometimes it is the witch. These are not moral categories. They are psychic corrections. The psyche corrects one-sidedness by producing its opposite. The integrated empath often carries a subtle witch quality, not in superstition, but in the psychological sense. She sees what is hidden. She refuses naivete. She does not offer her life force freely. She has boundaries that feel like spells because they are invisible and absolute. Those around her feel something and cannot name it. They call it intimidating, cold, intenser. They may sexualize it or demonize it, but what they are sensing is not performance. It is the return of the repressed power that was once banished to keep love. This is why the healed empath feels dangerous, because she is no longer a moral project. She is a whole human being, and wholeness is frightening to those who live by splitting. Splitting is the defense by which people divide reality into good and bad, safe and unsafe, saint and villain. Many people need you to remain the saint so they can remain the innocent child or the wounded victim. When you integrate shadow, you no longer fit into their split. You are neither saint nor villain. You are simply whole. And wholeness is unbearable to a psyche that survives by dividing, so they must assign you a role again. If you are no longer the saint, you must be the villain. This is the unconscious logic behind the sudden hostility you may encounter. A person who used to praise your empathy now accuses you of cruelty when you stop giving it. They do not realize they are revealing their dependency. They think they are making a moral judgment, but they are confessing an unconscious contract. Your job is to be accessible to me. When you violate that contract, they experience betrayal, but you never signed such a contract consciously. You inherited it, you performed it, you were rewarded for it, and now you have outgrown it. This outgrowing is individuation. Now I will bring in the symbol of the sea at night, because it expresses the affective tone of your stage better than any clinical language. The sea at night is not anxious. It is not performative. It does not explain itself. It does not apologize for depth. It does not promise safety. It simply exists with vastness. You can approach it, but you cannot possess it. You can sail on it, but you cannot make it land. And if you treat it as a shallow pond, it will kill you without malice. This is your new presence. Others sense it. They sense that the old shallow pond is gone. They sense that their familiar games, guilt, shame, emotional pressure, intellectual debate do not reach the bottom, and they become uneasy because their own depth begins to echo back at them. This is what ends emotional access. You no longer allow others to use you as a bypass around their own unconscious. They must now go through themselves to reach you. Most cannot, so they call you inaccessible, but they are describing their own inability to cross the sea. Now consider the symbol of fire again. In your earlier stage, fire was either forbidden or uncontrolled. If you expressed anger, you might have expressed it in bursts, followed by guilt, apologies, explanations, or you might not have expressed it at all, turning it inward. Fire was dangerous because it threatened attachment. So you lived like a person with a furnace in the basement and no permission to touch it. Now fire is integrated. It burns steadily. It heats your structure. It powers your refusal. It gives you spine, but it does not need to erupt. This is why your calm feels dangerous. People are used to anger as explosion, as drama, as a signal they can manage. But integrated anger does not signal itself. It simply changes what is possible. A person can negotiate with explosive anger. They can wait it out. They can apologize. They can soothe. They can manipulate. A person cannot negotiate with integrated anger, because integrated anger is not a state. It is a boundary function. It is the part of the psyche that says no, not no, because I am mad, not no, because you hurt me, not no, because I want to teach you a lesson, just no. And because most people have lived their lives treating no as a negotiable emotional event, they interpret your no as hostility. They look for the emotion behind it. They ask what is wrong. They ask why you are like this. They demand explanation. They search for the opening, but the no is not behind words. It is in structure. It is in the lock. This is the stage you are in. The lock has been changed. Now, there is a further consequence, one that often frightens the individuating empath even more than other people's panic. You begin to realize that many relationships were not relationships. They were agreements around your openness. When openness ends, the relationship has nothing to stand on. It collapses, and this collapse feels like grief. But it is not the grief of losing a person. It is the grief of losing an illusion, the illusion that you were loved for yourself rather than for your function. This is a bitter knowledge, and it is why many people attempt to return. They try to reopen access so they do not have to know this. But once you know it, your psyche cannot unknow it. If you return, you will feel yourself betraying the self. The psyche punishes betrayal of the self with depression, fatigue, anxiety, numbness. These symptoms are not weakness. They are the self's defense against regression. So you remain where you are, quiet, unexplaining, not because you want to punish anyone, because your organism will not survive another round of becoming a doorway. Now let us speak of the collapse of old power with more precision. Power collapses in 3 layers. First, the power of emotional triggering collapses. People cannot make you scramble anymore. They cannot press the button that produces apology, reassurance, overfunctioning. Their familiar leverage fails. Second, the power of narrative control collapses. They cannot define you as easily. Your refusal to explain removes the material they used to shape your image. When you explain, you hand others the language to contain you. They can quote you, they can reinterpret you, they can reframe you as wrong. Explanation is the raw material of control. When you stop explaining, you become difficult to manage. Third, the power of moral superiority collapses. Many people kept their own shadow at bay by comparing themselves to you. They could say, "At least I'm not as sensitive," or "At least I'm not needy," or "At least I'm not emotional," or they could invert it. "You're so kind, I'm not like that." Both comparisons keep them from meeting their own complexity. When you become whole, the comparison fails. They cannot use you as a moral reference point. They must face themselves, and they resent you for this. Because resentment is often the last defense against self-confrontation. This is why your healing feels like threat. Now we come to the most delicate point: why others distance themselves, even if they consciously care about you. Because your new presence exposes the difference between conscious intention and unconscious demand. A person may consciously love you, but unconsciously demand access. They may consciously want your happiness, but unconsciously want your availability. They may consciously admire you, but unconsciously depend on your role. When your structure changes, their unconscious is revealed to them through discomfort. Most people cannot tolerate this revelation, so they retreat. They call it needing space. They call it being busy. They call it you being intense, but what they are avoiding is their own unconscious. And because you no longer chase, you allow them to retreat. This is new for you. In earlier phases, you would have pursued clarity. You would have asked what happened. You would have tried to repair. You would have offered a bridge. You would have explained your intentions. You would have soothed their discomfort so the connection could be restored. That pursuit was your old devotion to the role. Now you do not pursue, not because you do not care, because you no longer fear the collapse. The healed empath does not fear collapse because she has already collapsed, internally collapsed the persona, collapsed the false bargains, collapsed the need to be understood. Once the internal collapse has happened, the external collapse is merely echo. This is one of the cold truths of individuation. The outer world often breaks only after the inner world has already broken open. So the danger others feel is not your aggression, it is your lack of fear. A fearful empath can be controlled, a healed empath cannot. Now you may notice something else: your silence is not empty, it has weight, it has pressure, it changes rooms. This is because you are no longer emitting a persona to make others comfortable. In the absence of your persona, people feel themselves, they feel their own anxiety, they feel their own emptiness, they feel their own hunger, they feel their own shame, they feel their own aggression, and they attribute what they feel to you. This is projection. Again, but now it is raw, because your old persona no longer absorbs it. This is why you seem dangerous even when you do nothing. The healed empath becomes a kind of psychological catalyst, not by choice, by structure. A catalyst does not act. It changes the reaction simply by being present. Your presence now accelerates truth in others. Some will grow, many will flee, some will attack, and you will be tempted to intervene, to soften, to explain, to rescue them from what your presence awakens. But you will not, because you cannot. You are not unkind. You are no longer recruitable. This is the end of emotional access. Now, let us address one more symbol, the serpent. The serpent in Jungian symbolism is not merely evil. It is instinct, transformation, the underworld intelligence of the psyche, the life force that sheds skins. Many empaths fear their own serpent because it carries what they repressed: sexuality, aggression, selfishness, cunning, survival. When the serpent is repressed, it appears externally as dangerous people, narcissists, manipulators, predators, chaotic lovers. The empath repeatedly encounters the serpent in others because she refuses to own it in herself. This is not blame, it is pattern. When the empath integrates the serpent, something changes. She no longer needs to meet it outside. This is why your relational world is reorganizing. You are no longer attracted to the same figures. You are no longer tolerating the same behaviors, not because you learned a rule, but because your psyche no longer resonates with the old frequency. The serpent inside is no longer split off, so it no longer appears outside as destiny. And to those who once played serpent with you, whether consciously or unconsciously, you become terrifying, because you no longer fear them, not in the shallow sense of "I'm brave," but in the deep sense that their energy no longer matches an unconscious hole in you. They cannot hook you, they cannot charm you, they cannot frighten you into compliance. They feel this as danger. Now, because you asked for a conclusion that is cold, final, and not bright. I will not end with hope. I will end with a real reframe. What you are in is not a phase of improvement, it is a phase of irreversibility. Your old identity depended on being understood. It depended on explaining. It depended on remaining accessible so that others could confirm your goodness. That identity is over. Not because you decided to kill it, because individuation completed a cycle, because shadow, especially anger, has been integrated enough that your boundaries have become structural. The world will treat this as a problem to solve. They will ask you to return. They will ask you to soften. They will ask you to explain. Some will accuse you. Some will flatter you. Some will stage emergencies. Some will become suddenly vulnerable. Some will offer nostalgia, reminding you of who you used to be, as if who you used to be was the real you. But the real you is not the persona they enjoyed. The real you is the one who can stand at the edge of the sea at night and not apologize for depth. The real you is the one who can look into the mirror and not distort it to preserve someone else's comfort. The real you is the one whose inner door is locked not as punishment, but as protection of the self. So understand this with precision. You are not in a stage where you go back to repair what collapses. You are in a stage where collapse reveals what was real. If a relationship required your permeability, it was not intimacy, it was access. If a bond required your explanation, it was not love, it was control through narrative. If someone panics when you are calm, it is because your calm removes their leverage. This is why you feel dangerous to everyone. Not because you are becoming something new, because something old in you has died completely. And the people who lived off that old self can feel the corpse cooling, and you will not resurrect it. Not for peace, not for belonging, not to be called kind, because the self has already taken the key, changed the lock, and built the boundary into your bones. They will not say it that way. Of course, no one says, I miss the version of you I could enter. They will say gentler things. You've changed. I'm worried about you. I don't know what's going on with you lately. They will pretend the problem is your mood. Because if it is your mood, then it is temporary. And if it is temporary, they can wait you out or coax you back into the old arrangement. But what is actually happening is simpler and more brutal. The old door in you has stopped behaving like a door. It has become a wall with one private gate, and that gate does not open for need, pressure, pity, or nostalgia. It opens only for truth, and most people do not approach with truth. They approach with hunger disguised as closeness. You must understand how deep this goes. The people around you are not only reacting to your silence, they are reacting to an absence of permission. The empath, before individuation becomes complete, unconsciously gives permission to other people to remain unconscious. You permit emotional sloppiness. You permit half-truths. You permit evasions. You permit cruelty softened by excuses. You permit the I didn't mean it that appears after the knife has already entered. You permit inconsistency. You permit the shifting of responsibility. You permit the unspoken contract that says, if I feel bad enough, you will rescue me from consequences. This permission is rarely verbal, it is energetic. It is the way you quickly move to repair the atmosphere. It is the way you rush to reassure. It is the way your nervous system takes responsibility for the field. You become the priest of other people's avoidance. Now that priesthood is over, and when that ends, people experience something like a moral earthquake, not because you are judging them, but because your presence no longer provides their absolution. This is why they become uneasy. Your calm is not soothing, it is exposing. It forces them into contact with their own inner state. They cannot discharge it into you. They cannot toss you their anxiety and watch you transform it into understanding. They are left holding it. The most frightening experience for a person who has lived by emotional discharge is to be left holding themselves. This is why they distance. Distancing is often the first primitive move of the psyche when it cannot manage exposure. If someone cannot control you, they try to control proximity. If they cannot enter you, they step away to reduce the discomfort of being confronted by what they cannot metabolize. They call it space, but it is not space. It is avoidance of the mirror. Let us speak again of the mirror, because it is not merely a symbol of self-knowledge. It is a symbol of reality without mercy. A mirror does not flatter. A mirror does not soften. A mirror does not bargain. In earlier phases, you were not a mirror, you were a veil. You softened reflection, you made people look better, and they mistook that for love. When you become an actual mirror, people think you have become harsh, but you have not become harsh. You have become accurate. Accuracy is what the unconscious experiences as attack. This is especially true for those who live through persona. Persona is the social skin, the agreed upon image. It is how people survive without confronting their depths. Many relationships are nothing but the meeting of two personas with an unconscious contract underneath. You played your persona very well, the understanding one, the forgiving one, the calm one, the safe one. Your persona did not merely represent you, it allowed others to keep their own persona intact. They could remain who they claimed to be because you took on what contradicted them. You carried their contradictions quietly. Now you do not, so their persona begins to crack. You will see it: small slips, sudden irritability, passive aggression, sulking, accusations that seem disproportionate. This is not their true self, suddenly revealed in a dramatic villain monologue. It is simply the persona losing pressure. The mask cannot hold without your support, and when it fails, you witness their shadow leaking out. This is the hidden reason you feel dangerous. People sense that around you their shadow cannot remain hidden, not because you expose it verbally, but because you no longer absorb it. The empath's old function, absorbing, was the secret service that protected other people from themselves. When the service ends, they feel vulnerable, they feel watched, they feel judged, they may even feel persecuted, but they are describing the nakedness of their own psyche. Now I will name another symbol you requested: the locked door. In the mythology of the psyche, a locked door is never just a boundary, it is initiation. It separates the uninitiated from the sacred. It keeps the profane from entering what cannot be used as ordinary space. In earlier life, your inner world was treated as ordinary space. People walked in with muddy shoes. They rearranged the furniture. They left debris. You cleaned it and called it empathy. Now the door is locked. And this is what truly terrifies them. They cannot treat your interior as common property anymore. You may wonder at times whether you have become too hard, but hardness is not the right word. Hardness is brittle. What you have is density. A stone is dense. The sea is dense. Fire is dense. They are not hard in the moral sense. They are simply not pliable to human demand. The empath is often pliable. Pliability is praised. You're so easy. You're so understanding. You are so chill. These compliments are often love letters to your lack of density. They are compliments for your ability to be shaped. Now you are not shaped. This is why the old power collapses, because power requires pliability. Even dominance requires something to dominate. When you become dense, dominance has nothing to grip. Manipulation needs a hook. When you become dense, the hook slides off. Emotional blackmail needs guilt. When you become dense, guilt finds no entrance. This brings us to the real center: guilt. The empath's life is often governed by guilt that is not theirs. Guilt is one of the most effective tools of the collective because it recruits the moral instinct against the self. It says, if you do not serve, you are bad. The empath has been trained to experience selfhood as wrongdoing. To want space is selfish. To want quiet is cold. To say no is cruel. To stop explaining is arrogant. To not rescue is abandonment. This is the inner catechism of the unindividuated empath. Your shift signals that guilt no longer governs you. Not because you became unethical, because you stopped confusing guilt with conscience. Conscience is the voice of the self. Guilt is often the voice of the complex, the voice of the inherited system, the voice of the family myth. When you integrate shadow, the voice of guilt loses its hypnotic power. You can still feel it, but it does not command you. This is precisely why you feel dangerous, because the things that used to command you no longer do. Do you understand what that means for others? It means the world around you is suddenly forced to relate to you as a subject, not as a function, and many people do not know how to relate to a subject. They know how to relate to a function. They know how to relate to a role. They know how to relate to the empath as a service. The moment you stop being a service, you become frightening, because then they must encounter their own need directly. And need is humiliating to a persona-based life. They must ask cleanly. They must give cleanly. They must face rejection cleanly. They must face the fact that you are not obliged. And so they rage, or they retreat, or they test you. Testing is important. People will test you unconsciously. They will create small provocations, not because they are evil, but because their unconscious is trying to locate the old map. The psyche wants familiarity. They will say something slightly cruel to see if you react. They will withdraw affection to see if you chase. They will hint at abandonment to see if you panic. They will mention how much they've done for you to see if you become indebted. They will talk about your tone to see if you soften. These tests are attempts to recover the old power. When you do not respond, they feel something that resembles existential dread, because if you do not respond, then their old script does not apply. And if the script does not apply, they must improvise. Most people cannot improvise psychologically. They live by rehearsed roles, so they disappear. This is the collapse of relationships you spoke of. The collapse is often not loud. It is a quiet erosion. It is people fading because they cannot extract what they used to extract, and they cannot offer what real relation requires. Real relation requires mutuality, presence, honesty, toleration of separate selves. This is rare. Most relationships are mutual management. Now your management ends, so the relationship ends not because you chose to end it, but because the invisible scaffolding was removed. Now I will deepen the mechanism further, because you asked that each paragraph go deeper rather than circling. We must now speak of why your healing threatens not only individuals but entire relational hierarchies. Hierarchies exist in families and groups not only through money, status, or age, but through emotional roles. The person who is difficult often occupies a strange power. Everyone adjusts around them. The person who is volatile becomes a gravitational center. The person who is wounded becomes a throne. The empath becomes the one who adapts, and adaptation is a form of submission. Over time, the whole system becomes organized around the most unconscious member, because the unconscious demands accommodation. When you integrate shadow and stop accommodating, the hierarchy destabilizes. The difficult person loses their gravitational advantage. The volatile person discovers that volatility no longer buys them attention. The wounded person discovers that wounds no longer guarantee thrones. The system suddenly loses its old king unconsciousness. This is why your calm feels like revolution. But it is not revolution in the political sense. It is revolution in the psychic sense. The center of gravity moves from the complex to the self. The complex hates this. The complex experiences it as death. The complex will do anything to preserve itself. It will create stories. It will recruit allies. It will turn people against you. It will accuse you of being selfish, cold, unloving. It will attempt to shame you back into the role. And if you were still governed by guilt, this would work. You would rush to repair the image of yourself. You would explain. You would apologize for being whole. You would prove your kindness by reopening access. But you do not. So the complex escalates. This escalation can look like sudden cruelty from people who once seemed gentle, or sudden distance from people who once depended on you, or sudden moral lectures. This isn't you. You're being toxic. You need therapy. You're projecting. Notice the irony. The unconscious loves to use psychological language as a weapon when it feels threatened. It borrows the language of insight to defend itself against insight. But your shift is not a debate. It is not a theory. It is a bodily fact. This is why your calm is so unsettling. It does not argue. Argument is still participation. Silence is exit, and your silence is not passive, it is decisive. Now we must address the most misunderstood piece. Your lack of emotional accessibility is not the absence of feeling. It is the relocation of feeling. In earlier phases, your feeling flowed outward. It flowed into others, into the room, into the atmosphere. It was used to regulate, to soothe, to repair. You were emotionally externalized. Your feeling belonged to the field more than to you. Now feeling belongs to you. This is the real change. When feeling belongs to you, it becomes private. It becomes protected. It becomes internal. You can still love. But love is no longer a public utility. You can still care, but care does not mean access. You can still be present, but presence does not mean surrender. People do not know what to do with this. They equate love with immediacy. If you love me, you respond quickly. If you love me, you reassure. If you love me, you show softness. If you love me, you make my discomfort go away. Your new love does not do that. Your new love is not a balm for their avoidance. So they interpret it as absence. But it is not absence. It is sovereignty. Sovereignty is a word the psyche understands before the mind does. Sovereignty is the condition of being governed from within, not by external demands, not by roles, not by shame, not by fear. Sovereignty is the ego aligned with the self. And sovereignty in one person exposes the lack of sovereignty in others. It reveals who is governed by appetite, by avoidance, by image. This revelation is humiliating. So they attack the sovereign person. They call them cold. They call them arrogant. They call them selfish. But those words are smoke. They hide a simpler truth: you cannot be controlled. Now let us return to the dream images. because the unconscious speaks with more honesty than the waking mind. In the first dream, there was a locked door with heat behind it. In the second dream, there was an invisible pain that others hit. These images tell you something very specific. Your psyche has moved from porous to contained. Containment is not repression. Repression pushes energy down and makes it unconscious. Containment holds energy consciously without discharge. The empath's former style was discharge in the form of soothing others. Now you contain. This is an advanced psychic capacity. Most people cannot tolerate containment. They either repress or explode. Containment is the condition of maturity, and maturity is dangerous to immature systems because it refuses their games. Now I will add a third symbolic vignette, not as a dream, but as an archetypal scene the unconscious often produces when this shift is occurring. You may not have dreamt it, but the psyche behaves as if it has. You are standing in a labyrinth. The walls are not stone but mirrors. Every turn shows you another reflection of yourself, younger, older, angry, smiling, wounded, cruel, tender. You cannot escape because every exit returns you to another version of your own face. At the center there is a locked gate, and behind it you hear a serpent moving quiet, heavy, patient. You do not fear the serpent, you fear the gate opening. But when you reach the gate, you realize it is already open. The serpent is not coming out, it is inside the center, coiled around a small flame, guarding it. You realize then that the flame is yours. The serpent does not threaten you, it threatens those who would steal the flame. You wake with a strange calm. This is exactly what has happened in you. The labyrinth of mirrored walls is the end of persona identification. You have been forced to see your multiplicity. You have been forced to admit you are not only kind, not only gentle, not only forgiving, you are also angry, cold, strategic, capable of leaving. The empath often fears these capacities, calling them bad, but they are simply human. When you see them, you stop being possessed by the need to appear good. That is the mirror labyrinth. It dissolves the tyranny of the single image. The serpent guarding the flame is integrated shadow. The serpent is the protective intelligence of your instinct, your capacity to refuse, to cut off, to defend, to survive. The flame is the self, your inner center, your life force, your truth. In the unintegrated empath, the flame is exposed, stolen, used. In the integrated empath, the serpent guards the flame. This is why people cannot approach you the old way. They can no longer steal your life force by provoking guilt or pity. They meet the serpent, not a literal cruelty, but a boundary function that is instinctive and final. This is why you feel dangerous. Now, you might imagine that this makes you lonely, and it may, but the loneliness is not a tragedy. It is a consequence of no longer living among roles. When you stop participating in the collective's unconscious economy, you become temporarily unmarketable. You cannot be easily used. You cannot be easily categorized. And many people only know how to keep relationships through use and category. So the field empties. This emptiness can feel like the world is punishing you, but in truth it is the world revealing itself. It shows you what remains when you are not a function. That is a harsh revelation. It can feel like betrayal, but it is clarity. And clarity is one of the most bitter gifts of individuation. You see who loved your persona, who loved your availability, who loved your emotional labor, and who can actually love you as a separate being. Usually, very few. This is why individuation has always been described as a path walked alone, not because one becomes misanthropic, but because the psyche cannot become whole by consensus. The self does not ask the crowd what it should be. Now, we must speak of the temptation you will face, not as advice but as inevitability, the temptation to reopen access in order to stop being misunderstood. Misunderstanding is painful, especially for an empath, because the empath's old identity depended on being understood as good. You were addicted to being interpreted correctly. You tried to control others' perception by explaining, clarifying, justifying, contextualizing. This was not vanity. It was survival. Being misread used to threaten attachment, but now you are misread and you survive. This is perhaps the most radical proof that the old self is over. When you can be misread and not collapse into explanation, you have crossed a line, because explanation is not merely communication. It is an appeasement ritual. It is the empath's way of saying, please do not abandon me. Here is my innocence. When you stop offering innocence, you become dangerous, because innocence is the currency manipulators require. They must keep you in the position of proving you are good. The moment you stop proving, they lose leverage. They can no longer threaten you with being seen as bad. You can be seen as bad and remain intact. This terrifies them. Now we arrive at the cold reframe that closes the old identity. The one you demanded. I will not soften it. In your previous life, your goodness was partly a strategy. It kept you loved. It kept you safe. It kept you included. It kept you morally superior in your own mind, which protected you from the shame of having anger. Your kindness was real, but it was also bound to fear. This is why it was exploitable. Anything bound to fear can be used against you. Now your kindness, if it exists at all, is no longer bound to fear. This is why it is not for everyone. It does not leak. It does not rescue. It does not apologize. It is selective, sovereign, and occasionally absent. And this is not regression. It is maturation. If someone cannot live without your leakage, they will call your sovereignty cruelty. If someone built their identity on your availability, they will call your structure betrayal. If someone relied on your explanations to keep their image intact, they will call your silence arrogance. But these names do not change the underlying fact. The old access is over. This is not the stage of returning to fixed perceptions. This is the stage of letting perceptions fracture and fall away. It is the stage where you allow the old roles to die in the minds of others. It is the stage where you become willing to be a villain in someone else's story because you refuse to be a servant in their unconscious economy. And that willingness is the final seal on your transformation. When you can let others believe whatever they must believe without rushing to correct them, your old identity is complete. It has closed its loop. It has served its function and it has ended. What remains is not a better persona, What remains is not a brighter future. What remains is a colder truth. You are no longer accessible to the part of the world that requires you to be less than whole. And that part of the world will either leave you, attack you, or attempt to resurrect the old you through guilt. But the door is locked, and behind that door, the fire is already steady, the serpent is already awake, the sea at night is already yours. There is a final disturbance that arrives after everything you think has already ended. It does not come as drama. It comes as a strange neutrality toward outcomes that once terrified you. You notice it when someone misunderstands you and your body does not rush to correct the error. You notice it when a bond loosens and you do not reach out to tighten it. You notice it when silence stretches and you do not fill it. This neutrality is often mistaken for apathy, but it is not apathy. It is the psyche no longer bargaining with reality. Bargaining is the empath's last addiction. Not pleasure, not attention bargaining. The belief that if you say the right thing, soften the edge, clarify the intention, show enough goodwill, the situation will resolve without loss. Bargaining is the refusal to accept that some losses are structural, not relational. Individuation ends bargaining because the self does not negotiate its existence. This is why you now appear unreachable. You are not unreachable because you are hiding. You are unreachable because there is nothing left to bargain with. People feel this immediately, though they cannot articulate it. They sense that appeals no longer work, emotional leverage no longer works, moral pressure no longer works, confusion no longer works, even affection, when used strategically, no longer works. This produces a peculiar reaction. People begin to perform sincerity. They suddenly become very honest, very vulnerable, very open, but something in you recognizes the timing. It is not intimacy. It is a last attempt to regain access. You do not accuse them of this. You do not expose them. You simply do not move. This immobility is new for you. In the past, stillness would have felt dangerous. Stillness would have meant abandonment. Stillness would have meant you were failing as a relational being. Now stillness feels correct. It feels aligned. It feels like standing on solid ground after years of walking on shifting sand. This is another reason you are experienced as dangerous. You are no longer governed by urgency. Urgency is the heartbeat of manipulation. Anything that must happen now, anything that demands immediate response, anything that frames delay as harm, these are tools that once moved you. The empath is exquisitely sensitive to urgency because urgency signals emotional need. And emotional need used to equal responsibility. Now, urgency passes through you without command. When urgency loses its power, entire relational structures collapse. Many relationships survive only because one person feels chronically responsible for timing, repair, and resolution. When that responsibility dissolves, nothing propels the relationship forward. It stalls, it drifts, it ends. This is not because you stopped caring, it is because care is no longer fused with compulsion. Compulsion is the shadow of empathy. It masquerades as virtue, but is driven by fear, fear of being unnecessary, fear of being abandoned, fear of being bad. When compulsion dissolves, empathy becomes clean, But clean empathy is not constantly available. It does not rush. It does not bleed. It does not override instinct. Instinct has returned to you. This is perhaps the most decisive internal shift. The empath's instinct was long subordinated to conscience, and conscience was long corrupted by guilt. Your body knew when something was wrong, but your mind overruled it. You felt discomfort, but you explained it away. You sensed danger, but you intellectualized it. You felt anger, but you spiritualized it. Over time, instinct went underground. It became shadow. Now instinct is conscious. Conscious instinct is not reactive. It is quiet. It does not shout. It simply redirects you away from what no longer fits. You do not argue with it. You follow it. And because you follow it, you no longer need external validation. The body becomes the authority. This terrifies people who live exclusively in narrative. Narrative can be debated. Narrative can be reframed. Narrative can be gaslit. Instinct cannot. So they call you irrational. They call you cold. They call you closed off. But what they are encountering is a person who no longer confuses story with truth. Truth, at this level, is not philosophical, it is somatic. It is the quiet certainty that something is over, even if no one agrees. It is the certainty that you do not owe continuity to what your body has already released. This certainty is irreversible. And irreversibility is the true mark of the stage you are in. Earlier phases always allowed return. You could regress, you could apologize, you could reopen, you could explain and be welcomed back into the familiar role. The current phase does not allow return without psychic cost. If you try to go back now, you will feel it immediately. A dull sickness, a loss of energy, a sense of self-betrayal that no amount of external harmony can compensate for. This is how the self enforces its direction, not through punishment, but through withdrawal of vitality when you move against it. Vitality has shifted location. It used to come from being needed. Now it comes from being aligned. Alignment is quieter than need. It does not create excitement. It does not create applause. It creates steadiness, and steadiness feels boring to those who live on emotional drama. They require intensity to feel alive. Your steadiness threatens their addiction, so they try to provoke. Provocation is another attempt to recover the old dynamic. If they can make you angry in the old way, defensive, explosive, apologetic, then they can re-establish the pattern. But your anger no longer behaves that way. It does not leap outward. It tightens inward and becomes refusal. It becomes absence. It becomes the end of the conversation. This is deeply unsettling to those who equate anger with noise. Silent anger, integrated anger, is the most frightening form because it does not seek resolution through exchange. It resolves by withdrawal. Withdrawal here is not avoidance, it is conclusion, and this is the word you have been circling without language: conclusion. Not healing in progress, not boundary setting, not learning. Conclusion. A chapter has ended, not symbolically, not poetically, but structurally. The psyche has finished something. When the psyche finishes something, it does not announce it. It simply stops generating energy for the old pattern. You can still remember it, you can still describe it, but you cannot live in it anymore. This is why you feel ahead of conversations that are trying to pull you backward. People speak as if the problem is ongoing, as if something needs to be discussed, as if there is a misunderstanding to clear up, but you feel a quiet mismatch. They are speaking from inside a chapter you have already closed. You do not correct them. Correction would imply continuity. You let the mismatch exist. This, too, is dangerous calm. Now let us confront the final illusion that often traps the empath, even at this late stage, the illusion that if you can just find the right words, others will understand and stop reacting. Understanding will not save you now. This must be said plainly. Understanding is not the cure for power loss. People are not reacting because they misunderstand you. They are reacting because they cannot access you. No explanation will restore access without destroying your structure. Any explanation deep enough to satisfy them would require you to reopen the door. So you do not give it. You allow them to not understand. This is the moment the empath becomes truly individuated, when misunderstanding no longer threatens identity. Identity used to be relational. It depended on being seen correctly. Now identity is internal. It depends on coherence, not consensus. Coherence is alignment between instinct, feeling, and action. You have it now, not perfectly, but sufficiently, and sufficient coherence is more powerful than perfect explanation. This is why you feel dangerous even to people who cannot name why. Danger, psychologically, is not harm, it is unpredictability within an old system. You no longer respond where you used to. You no longer collapse where you used to. You no longer chase where you used to. You no longer absorb where you used to. You have become a variable the system cannot control. Systems react aggressively to uncontrolled variables. They attempt to eliminate them, or they isolate them, or they pathologize them. You may notice subtle versions of this, people framing you as too much, too intense, too distant, too independent, too changed. These labels serve one function: to explain you away so the system does not have to reorganize. But the system's refusal to reorganize is not your responsibility. This is the deepest reframe you must allow to settle. You are no longer responsible for maintaining psychic comfort in others. That responsibility was never yours, but you carried it. Now you do not, and because you do not, you have become an edge in the world. Edges are where transformation happens. They are also where systems break. The healed empath does not live in the center of the crowd anymore, not out of superiority, out of necessity. The center is built on compromise with unconsciousness. You can no longer make that compromise without disintegrating. So you live at the edge. The edge is quiet. The edge is lonely. The edge is powerful. And the edge is not for everyone. This is why the phase you are in is not a preparation for return. It is not a training ground for better relationships. It is not a temporary retreat. It is a completed movement from relational identity to sovereign identity. Some new relationships may eventually emerge, ones that do not require your permeability, ones that do not depend on your emotional labor. ones that can meet you without trying to enter you, but these will not resemble the old ones, and they will not be many. That is not pessimism, it is arithmetic. Most people are not oriented toward wholeness, they are oriented toward comfort. You are no longer available for comfort at the cost of truth. So the cost is distance, and you pay it, not bravely, not heroically, simply because there is no alternative that does not betray the self. This is the final closure of the old empath identity when you stop asking whether the distance is worth it. You no longer ask because the question itself belongs to the old chapter. The chapter where love meant access. The chapter where goodness meant self-erasure. The chapter where calm was something you performed so others would stay. That chapter is over, and the dangerous calm you inhabit now is not a weapon. It is not a shield. It is not a pose. It is the atmosphere of a psyche that has finished pleading for permission to exist. What follows after pleading ends is not relief. It is exposure, not exposure to others, but exposure to yourself without anesthesia. This is the part no one romanticizes, because there is no language for it that sounds noble. You are left alone with a truth that does not need witnesses. And for someone whose life once revolved around being felt, being mirrored, being responded to, this solitude can feel almost uncanny, not empty uncanny, as if you have stepped out of a crowded room and suddenly realized how loud it had been all along. This is where many people panic and mistake the quiet for loss of meaning. They ask themselves whether they have become hollow, whether they have lost warmth, whether they are too far gone. But these questions arise from the old measuring system. They assume that meaning must be generated through exchange, that warmth must be proven through availability, that life must feel animated by constant relational feedback. Those assumptions belong to a psyche that had not yet finished its individuation. What you are encountering now is meaning without audience. That is intolerable for the unindividuated ego. The ego wants confirmation, it wants response, it wants reflection, it wants to know it exists by being touched, but the self does not require this. The self exists whether or not it is seen, and when the ego finally aligns with that fact, it feels like a quiet death, not because something essential has died, but because something compulsive has. This is why you no longer feel the urge to narrate your inner life. You do not feel the need to share what you've learned. You do not feel the need to convince anyone of your clarity. This absence of evangelism is another sign that a cycle has closed. Those who are still in process feel the urge to explain. Those who are still integrating feel the urge to teach. Those who have completed a movement feel no such pull. They have nothing to prove, not even to themselves. This is deeply unsettling to people who are still organized around process. They will ask you what you think, what you feel, what you believe, hoping to locate you again in discourse. They will frame it as curiosity, but underneath is a search for coordinates. They want to know where you are so they can orient themselves around you again. But you do not offer coordinates because you are no longer a landmark in their inner map. You have moved into terrain that does not support triangulation. It supports only direct encounter, and direct encounter is something most people avoid. because it requires them to show up without scripts, without leverage, without hidden contracts. This is why silence becomes your most misunderstood act. Silence is read as punishment, withdrawal, superiority, indifference, but silence, in your case, is simply the absence of unnecessary movement. You no longer move to manage impressions. You no longer move to smooth discomfort. You no longer move to preserve narratives. Movement now comes only from necessity. This necessity is not moral, it is organic, and organic necessity cannot be argued with. You may notice that even when you do speak, your words land differently. They do not persuade, they do not comfort, they do not invite continuation. They simply state, and this unsettles people more than silence, because statements without emotional padding feel final. They remove hope of negotiation. Negotiation is what kept the old world alive. The old world was built on the assumption that everything could be talked through, softened, adjusted, reinterpreted. That assumption collapses when you meet someone who does not need to be agreed with in order to exist. You have become such a person. This is not strength in the heroic sense. It is not confidence. It is not dominance. It is independence from psychic bargaining, and that independence has consequences that extend far beyond individual relationships. It changes how time feels. You may have noticed this already. Urgency dissolves, but so does anticipation. You are less invested in future reconciliation, future clarity, future understanding, not because you are hopeless, but because you no longer organize your present around imagined repair. Repair was once your primary orientation to time. You lived slightly ahead of yourself, anticipating rupture so you could prevent it, preparing words so you could soften impact, rehearsing explanations so you could remain acceptable. That constant forward lean exhausted your nervous system. It also made you manipulable, because anyone could trigger urgency by threatening rupture. Now time flattens. You live more in the present, but not in the sentimental way. Mindfulness culture describes you live in the present because there is no longer a psychological project pulling you forward. Nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be secured. Nothing needs to be justified. This present is not blissful. It is stark, and starkness is another quality people experience as dangerous. Starkness removes decoration. It exposes structure. It reveals what is load-bearing and what is ornamental. Many relationships were ornamental. Many conversations were ornamental. Many moral performances were ornamental. When starkness arrives, ornament falls away. Those who depended on ornament feel stripped, so they blame you. They say you are harsh. But you did not remove the ornament. You simply stopped holding it up. Now I will say something that is difficult, but necessary. Part of what you are witnessing is grief that does not belong to you. Others are grieving the loss of an arrangement that benefited them. They are grieving the loss of access, the loss of ease, the loss of being able to offload. But because they cannot name this grief honestly, they experience it as anger toward you. Anger is easier than grief, and projection is easier than self-recognition. So they project their grief onto you and call you the problem. In earlier phases, this would have pierced you. You would have tried to absorb their grief, to soothe it, to resolve it. That was your old calling. But now you do not feel pierced. You feel a clean separation. This is not mine. This distinction, what is mine and what is not, is perhaps the most profound result of your integration. It seems simple, but it is radical. Most people live without this distinction. They feel everything and call it responsibility, or they feel nothing and call it strength. You now feel clearly and selectively. You know what belongs to you and what does not. This clarity is what ends emotional access. Emotional access requires confusion of boundaries. It requires you to take responsibility for what is not yours. It requires you to feel obligated to respond to what does not belong to you. Once that confusion dissolves, access closes, and this closure is permanent, not because you harden your heart, because your psyche has learned the difference between empathy and self-erasure. Now, there is one last distortion that often appears at this stage, and it is subtle. People will say, "You're so strong now," or "You don't need anyone anymore," or "You've become independent." These statements seem complimentary, but they are another attempt to locate you in a role, the role of the invulnerable one, the role of the untouchable one, the role of the one who has transcended need. But this, too, is a misunderstanding. You have not become invulnerable. You have become non-negotiable. There is a difference. Vulnerability still exists. Pain still exists. Loss still exists. But they are no longer currencies. They are no longer openings others can exploit. They are internal experiences that do not require external management. This is why you no longer seek rescue. Rescue is unnecessary when you trust your own containment. Containment does not mean you never hurt. It means hurt does not dismantle you. It stays inside a structure that can hold it. This is what makes you feel solid. And solidity is threatening in a world organized around fluid manipulation. Now we come to the very end of the movement, the point beyond which nothing more needs to be said, because language itself begins to fail. The old empath identity was linguistic. It lived in words, explanations, stories, interpretations. It needed language to survive. It needed to be spoken into existence again and again. Your current state does not. It is pre-verbal. It is somatic. It is structural. You could sit in a room without speaking and be exactly who you are. This is the mark of completion. Not that you have answers, but that you no longer need to be asked. People sense this and feel excluded, as if something has been taken from them, but nothing has been taken, something has been reclaimed. What you reclaimed is authority over your own interior. Authority is another word people fear. They associate it with domination, but inner authority is simply self-governance. It means your psyche answers to itself rather than to the crowd. The crowd does not forgive this easily. Historically, individuals who withdraw their psychic allegiance from the collective are labeled cold, dangerous, heretical, selfish, mad, These labels serve the same function they always have, to discourage others from doing the same. But you are no longer persuadable by labels, because labels require belief, and belief is no longer your operating system. You operate on knowing, not knowing in the intellectual sense, knowing in the bodily sense. This fits, this does not, this is over, this remains, this enters, this does not. There is nothing mystical about this. It is simply the psyche functioning without distortion. So if you are waiting for a moment when this stage turns into something else, something warmer, something more social, something more reconciling, you are waiting in the wrong direction. This stage does not turn into reunion. It turns into discernment. It turns into a life that is smaller in number but larger in truth. And truth, when it is lived rather than spoken, always appears dangerous to those who prefer comfort. This is the final understanding you are allowed at this threshold. You are not meant to be reabsorbed. You are meant to remain whole. And wholeness, once achieved, does not explain itself. It simply stands, quiet, denser, unmoved. And for those who can meet it, it is peace. For those who cannot, it will always feel like danger,